Hello my dear travelers. Welcome back to our sanctuary of stories, where the mist rolls in from distant shores and the ancient whispers of the Celtic world find their voice once more. Tonight, we venture to the very edge of the land, where the wild Atlantic crashes against weathered cliffs, where the boundary between earth and ocean blurs into something altogether more mysterious. Tonight, we speak of the Selkies, those enchanting shapeshifters who dwell in the cold embrace of the northern seas, creatures of profound beauty and even deeper sorrow. Picture yourself standing on a windswept beach on the western coast of Ireland, or perhaps among the rugged islands of Scotland's Outer Hebrides. The salt spray kisses your face as waves roll endlessly toward the shore, each one carrying secrets from the depths. In the fading light of dusk, you might spot them, dark shapes bobbing in the surf, seals with their liquid eyes watching you with an intelligence that seems almost human. And well they might be, for according to the old stories, these seals are not quite what they appear. They are the Selkies, the seal folk, beings who live their lives caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. The Selkie stands as one of the most captivating and melancholic figures in all of Celtic mythology. Unlike the fearsome creatures that populate so many old tales, the Selkie is not a monster to be vanquished or a demon to be exorcised. Rather, they are beings of profound gentleness, of otherworldly beauty, and of a yearning so deep it echoes through the centuries. Their stories speak to something fundamental in the human experience, that sense of being torn between competing desires, that feeling of never quite fitting into the world we find ourselves in, that longing for a home we can barely remember but cannot forget. In the folklore of Ireland and Scotland, particularly in the islands where the sea dominates every aspect of life, the Selkie has held a place of honor and mystery for countless generations. These are not recent inventions of the literary imagination, but ancient beliefs woven into the very fabric of coastal communities, passed down through the centuries in the Gaelic tongue, whispered by firesides on winter nights when the wind howled and the waves crashed with primal fury against the rocks. The tales of the Selkies have traveled far from their northern origins, inspiring poets and storytellers, artists and musicians, even in our modern age. Yet at their heart, they remain what they have always been, stories about transformation and identity, about love and loss, about the painful choices we must sometimes make between freedom and connection, between our truest selves and the lives we are expected to live. They are stories that remind us of our own deep connection to the natural world, particularly to that vast and mysterious realm that is the ocean, that place of both abundance and danger, of beauty and terror, of life and death. So settle in, dear friends, and let the sound of the waves guide us into the world of the Selkies. Let us explore their origins in the mists of time, follow their tragic romances and bittersweet tales, understand the symbols and meanings woven through their stories, and discover why, after all these centuries, we still find ourselves drawn to these mysterious beings of the sea. The origins and etymology of the Selkie legend. To truly understand the Selkies, we must first trace their origins through the winding paths of language and history. The word Selkie itself comes from the Scots language, derived from the older word seol or selch, which simply means seal. In various dialects and across different islands, you will find the name spelled in different ways: Silkie, Silkie, Selchie, or Selkie. Each variation carries with it the accent and inflection of the community that spoke it, but all refer to the same extraordinary beings. Interestingly, in the Irish Gaelic tradition, specific terms for these seal people are relatively rare. More commonly, they were grouped together with other marine beings under broader terms. In Scottish Gaelic, they might be called Maideen Mara, in Irish Gaelic Maideen Mara, and in Manx Moidin Vare, all of which translate to Maiden of the Sea, a term that could refer to mermaids, Selkies, or any number of female water spirits. The only term that specifically and exclusively refers to Selkies is Maideen Roin, meaning seal maiden. though this term appears only rarely in the old stories. This linguistic blending tells us something important about how these creatures were understood. They existed in that liminal space, that threshold between categories, neither quite seal nor quite human, neither quite mermaid nor quite something else entirely. They were beings of the in-between, and even the language used to describe them reflected this quality of existing on the boundaries. The geographic heart of Selkie folklore lies in the Northern Isles of Scotland, specifically Orkney and Shetland, those wind-battered archipelagos where the North Sea meets the Atlantic, where treeless islands rise from waters so cold and powerful they can claim lives in mere moments. Here, in communities that depended entirely on the sea for survival, that harvested fish and shellfish, that watched the tides with the attention of those whose lives literally depended on understanding the ocean's moods, the Selkie stories flourished. But the tales were not confined to these islands alone. They spread throughout the Hebrides, that long chain of islands off Scotland's western coast, where Gaelic culture remained strong even as it faded from much of the mainland. They took root in coastal communities throughout Scotland and Ireland, particularly in counties like Donegal in Ireland's northwest, where the Atlantic crashes against some of the most dramatic coastline in all of Europe. The stories even travelled to the Faroe Islands and Iceland, those other northern outposts where Norse and Celtic cultures mingled, where the seal was a familiar sight in cold waters. The earliest written references to Selkies appear in medieval texts, though the stories themselves are undoubtedly far older, passed down through oral tradition long before anyone thought to commit them to parchment. The Orkneyinga saga, a 13th century chronicle of the history of the Orkney Islands, contains references to these seal people, though the most detailed accounts would not be collected until much later, in the 18th and 19th centuries, when folklorists began the important work of recording the stories that had lived for so long only in memory and speech. One of the most significant collections came from Captain F.W.L. Thomas of the Royal Navy, who in the 1850s encountered a venerable lady from Snara Voe in Shetland who sang for him the ballad that would become known as the Great Silkie of Sule Skerry. This haunting song, which we shall explore in greater depth later, would eventually be catalogued as Child Ballad number 113, when Francis James Child compiled his monumental collection of traditional ballads in the late 19th century. But where did these beliefs actually come from? What inspired people to imagine seals that could become human, or humans who could become seals? As with so many aspects of folklore, the truth likely lies in a complex weaving of observation, experience, and imagination. Some scholars have proposed that the Selkie legends may have had their roots in actual historical encounters. The Victorian-era folklorist David MacCodrum suggested that early Scottish settlers may have encountered Sami or Finnish travellers who wore sealskin clothing and navigated the northern waters in kayaks covered with sealskin. When these kayaks became waterlogged, they would sit lower in the water, barely visible above the surface, and the travellers would need to come ashore to dry their skins before continuing their journey. To observers unfamiliar with such technology, it's been theorized that the sight of a person emerging from what appeared to be a seal-like form in the water, removing their sealskin clothing, and revealing their human form beneath might well have seemed like a magical transformation. While this interpretation offers an intriguing possibility for one origin of the tales, it can only partially explain the richness and complexity of Selkie mythology. Others have pointed to misidentified sightings of Inuit travellers, sometimes called Finmen in old Scottish accounts, who similarly used sealskin kayaks and clothing, and who occasionally ventured as far as Scottish waters. The mystery of these strangers from distant lands, speaking foreign tongues and possessing unfamiliar technologies, may have been explained through the framework of the supernatural, though this remains another interpretive possibility rather than a proven origin. But beyond these possible historical inspirations, there is something deeper at work in the Selkie legends, something that speaks to the actual seals themselves and the profound impact they had on coastal communities. Seals are remarkable creatures. They are intelligent, curious, and surprisingly expressive. Their large, dark eyes can seem remarkably human, conveying what appears to be emotion and thought. They are mammals like us, warm-blooded creatures that must surface to breathe, that nurse their young, that form social bonds. Yet they are utterly at home in an environment that is hostile to human life, gliding through cold waters with an effortless grace that humans can only clumsily attempt to imitate. For people who spent their lives in intimate proximity to the sea, who watched the seals hauling out onto rocks to bask in rare moments of sunshine, who heard their strange, almost song-like vocalizations carrying across the water, who saw them watching back with those two knowing eyes, it's easy to understand why they might have imagined these creatures to be something more than merely animal. In a worldview where the boundary between the mundane and the magical was far more permeable than it is today, where the ocean itself was understood as a realm of mystery and power, the idea that seals might shed their skins and walk among humans as people seemed not outlandish but entirely possible. Moreover, the Selkie legends emerged from communities that understood transformation as a fundamental aspect of existence. The Celtic tradition is rich with shapeshifters, beings who move between forms as easily as they might change clothing. The sea itself transforms constantly, from glassy calm to raging tempest, from provider of abundance to taker of lives. In such a world, the Selkie represents not an anomaly but a natural expression of this transformative power. The nature and characteristics of Selkies. To understand the Selkie, we must first understand the mechanics of their transformation, for it is in this act of changing that the deepest meanings of their mythology reside. Unlike many shapeshifters in folklore who transform through magical incantations, under the influence of curses, or through the power of certain celestial events like the full moon, the Selkie's transformation is elegantly simple, yet profoundly significant. They shed their skin. Imagine, if you will, a remote beach, far from any human dwelling, bathed in the silver light of a full moon. The tide has drawn back, leaving behind smooth sand and shallow pools that reflect the stars like fragments of sky fallen to earth. From the dark waters, shapes emerge, sleek seals pulling themselves onto the shore with their flippers. But then, something extraordinary occurs. The seals begin to work at their skins, loosening them, peeling them back. And beneath the seal exterior, human forms are revealed. In their human guise, Selkies are described in the old tales as being breathtakingly beautiful. The women have flowing hair, often described as being dark as midnight or bearing the sheen of a seal's coat, and their eyes retain something of the liquid depth of their seal form. Their movements carry a particular grace, fluid and unhurried, as though they are forever swimming through invisible currents. The men are described as handsome and powerfully built, with a magnetism that draws the human heart as surely as the moon draws the tides. Yet for all their beauty, there is something about them that marks them as not quite of this world. Their skin might have an unusual quality, described in some accounts as being slightly greenish or having a particular sheen. Between their fingers and toes, thin webs of skin might be visible, a reminder of their aquatic nature. Their voices are said to be enchanting, capable of song that can move the human heart to tears or laughter. And in their eyes, if you look closely enough, you might catch a glimpse of vast oceanic distances, of depths unmeasured and currents unknown. But the Selkies' true power, and their true vulnerability, lies in their sealskin. This is not merely clothing that can be discarded and easily replaced. The sealskin is the Selkies' essential nature made manifest. It is both their means of transformation and their identity itself. Without it, they cannot return to the sea. Without it, they are trapped in human form, cut off from their true home, forced to live a life that, no matter how comfortable it might be on the surface, will always feel like exile. The sealskin, in the old stories, is described as being soft and supple, sometimes with a silvery sheen, sometimes dark as the deep sea itself. It is precious beyond measure, for it represents not just the ability to transform but freedom itself. A Selkie guards their skin jealously, for they understand full well what will happen should it fall into human hands. They typically hide their skins carefully when they come ashore, tucking them into crevices in the rocks, burying them in sand, concealing them in caves known only to themselves. The skin must be close enough to be retrieved quickly should danger threaten, yet hidden well enough that no casual observer will stumble upon it. The timing of Selkie transformations varies across different tellings of the tales. Some accounts hold that Selkies can shed their skins and take human form only on certain nights of the year, most commonly Midsummer's Eve, when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest, or during the full moon, when the tide runs highest and the ocean's power is at its peak. Other stories suggest they might transform every 7th night, or every 9th night, following rhythms tied to the ancient Celtic understanding of sacred numbers. Still others maintain that male Selkies can transform more freely than females, though they too are constrained by certain conditions. The number 7 appears with striking frequency in Selkie lore. In the famous ballad of the great Silkie of Sule Skerry, the Selkie father promises to return in 7 years to claim his son. In other tales, a human woman who wishes to summon a male Selkie must shed 7 tears into the sea. Selkies themselves are sometimes said to be able to take human form only once every 7 years. This recurring number is deeply significant in Celtic tradition, appearing in countless myths and legends as a number of completion, of cycles, of the passage from one state to another. When Selkies come ashore in their human form, they are drawn to certain activities that speak to their dual nature. They love to dance under the moonlight on remote beaches, their movements as graceful as the waves themselves. They sing songs of haunting beauty, melodies that speak of the depths and distances, of freedom and longing. They gather in groups, often in 3s or 7s, those sacred numbers again, and they revel in the feel of dry land beneath their feet, the sensation of moving through air rather than water, the experience of warmth from fire rather than the cold embrace of the sea. Yet even in these moments of seeming joy, there is always an undercurrent of melancholy in the tales. The Selkies are never entirely comfortable on land. They are visitors here, tourists in a strange country, and however much they might enjoy certain aspects of the human world, they always long for the sea. Watch a Selkie long enough in human form, the old stories tell us, and you will see them turn their gaze toward the water. You will see a distance come into their eyes, a yearning that nothing on land can satisfy. You will understand that their hearts, their very souls, belong to the ocean, and that this time on land is but a temporary sojourn, a brief exploration of a world that can never truly be theirs. This dual existence, this constant pull between 2 worlds, 2 forms, 2 identities, is what makes the Selkie such a potent symbol. They embody the experience of living between states, of being neither one thing nor another, of carrying within themselves the deep memory of a home to which they desperately wish to return, coupled with the reality of a present that keeps them landlocked and earthbound. In this, they speak to something profoundly human, even as they are profoundly other. The tales of female Selkies, love, loss, and longing. The stories that have come down to us most frequently involve female Selkies, and these tales follow certain patterns, certain motifs that appear again and again across different versions and different locations. They are, at their heart, stories of captivity and longing, of love that is complicated by coercion, of families built on foundations that can never be entirely stable. The typical female Selkie tale begins, as so many fairy stories do, with a man. He is often a fisherman or a farmer living in a remote coastal area, a bachelor who has not yet found a wife. Perhaps he is lonely, or perhaps he is simply curious, but one night, drawn by strange sounds or simply by chance, he comes upon a hidden beach or a secluded cove. There, in the moonlight, he sees something that takes his breath away, beautiful women dancing on the sand. their movements hypnotic, their laughter like music. Their sealskins lie in a pile nearby, shed and forgotten in the joy of the moment. The man understands immediately what he is witnessing. These are selkies, and he knows from the old stories exactly what such an encounter means. If he can seize one of their skins before they can retrieve it, the selkie will be unable to return to the sea. She will be, in essence, his to command. And so, whether driven by loneliness, desire, or simple selfishness, he creeps forward and snatches up one of the skins. The other selkies, alerted to danger, rush to gather their skins and plunge back into the safety of the waves. But one is left behind, her skin stolen, her means of escape removed. She begs the man to return what is hers. She pleads, she weeps, she makes promises. But he refuses. He has fallen in love with her at first sight, he claims, or he needs a wife, or he simply will not relinquish his prize. And so the selkie woman, with no other choice available to her, agrees to become his wife. In some versions of the tale, the selkie genuinely comes to care for the man who has trapped her. She becomes a good wife, keeping his home, cooking his meals, bearing his children. She is gentle and kind, obedient and dutiful. To all outward appearances, she seems content with her lot. But those who know her best, her husband if he is observant, her children certainly, can see something in her eyes. She gazes at the ocean with an expression of profound longing. She is drawn to the shore at every opportunity. She sings melancholy songs in a language her human family cannot understand. She seems most herself when she is near the water, as though proximity to the sea restores something vital that daily life on land drains away. Years may pass in this fashion. The selkie wife may bear several children, may raise them with love, may create the appearance of a happy home. But she never stops searching. In quiet moments, when her husband is away at his work, she looks for her sealskin. She searches the house from top to bottom. She checks every chest, every cupboard, every hidden corner. She does not forget what was taken from her, and she does not give up hope of recovering it. In the classic telling, it is often one of her children who discovers the skin. Perhaps the child is playing and finds a strange soft bundle hidden in the thatch of the roof, or tucked away in a locked chest to which they have found the key, or concealed in some secret place their father thought was secure. The child, not understanding the significance of what they have found, shows it to their mother. And the moment the selkie woman's hands touch her sealskin, everything changes. She may embrace her children one last time. She may look at her husband with something like sorrow or regret. She may hesitate for a moment, torn between the life she has built and the call of the sea. But in the end, the pull is too strong. She takes her sealskin, wraps it around herself, and runs for the shore. She does not look back as she plunges into the waves. She does not hear the cries of her children calling for her to return. Or if she does hear them, they are not enough to overcome the overwhelming need to be home, to be in the sea, to be once again in her true form. Some versions of the tale end here, with the family left behind, bereft and heartbroken. The husband has lost his wife, the children their mother, and they must somehow find a way to continue without her. In particularly tragic versions, the woman had a selkie husband of her own in the sea before her capture, and she returns to him, leaving her human family forever. But other versions offer a gentler ending. In these tales, the selkie woman, once returned to the sea, does not entirely forget her human family. She may be seen occasionally, swimming near the shore when her children are playing on the beach. She may bring gifts of fish, ensuring that her family never goes hungry. Once a year, on a specific night, she may come ashore in human form to visit her children, to see how they have grown, to reassure them that though she could not stay, her love for them remains. These encounters are bittersweet, filled with joy at reunion but shadowed by the knowledge that they are temporary, that at the end of the night, the mother will return to the sea, and her children will return to a house that will forever feel incomplete. Let me share with you one specific tale that captures these themes beautifully. The story of Thady Ruaidh O'Dowd, a clan chieftain from the west of Ireland. Thady had recently come into his position of leadership, and with it came the responsibility of taking a wife. But Thady found the choice difficult. None of the women presented to him seemed quite right. Frustrated and troubled, he went walking on the beach to clear his head and think. It was there, in a sheltered cove, that he came upon her, a woman of extraordinary beauty, sitting on the rocks and combing her long dark hair. She was unclothed, but beside her lay what appeared to be a cloak or coat of silver grey. Thady, like any man raised on the stories of his people, knew immediately what she was. And like so many men in these tales, he was seized by desire and by opportunity. He snatched up her sealskin and hid it away. The Selkie woman, whom the story names Eve, had no choice but to return with him and become his wife. By all accounts, their marriage appeared successful. They ruled their lands together, raised 7 children, and Thady proved to be a good husband in many ways. But Eve never lost her longing for the sea. She would stand at the windows of their home, gazing out at the waves. She would walk the beaches, letting the surf wash over her feet, as close to her old home as she could get without her skin. The years passed, and Thady, confident that he had hidden the skin well and that Eve had accepted her life with him, grew perhaps less cautious than he should have. One day, one of their children saw their father checking a hiding place and, innocent of the implications, mentioned to his mother that he had seen a bag of gold there. Eve understood immediately. When Thady was away from home, she went to the place her child had described and found, not gold, but her long-lost sealskin. The call was irresistible. Yet the story suggests that Eve's choice was not easy. She had lived many years as a human. She had borne children and raised them. She had, in her way, cared for Thady. But the sea was her true home, and once she had her skin back, she could not deny its call. She returned to the ocean, leaving her family behind, choosing freedom over the life she had been forced to build on land. Another powerful example comes from the Scottish tradition, the tale of Neil MacCodrum. Neil was a fisherman travelling along the coast one evening when he spied a group of naked women dancing on the beach under the moonlight. When he stepped on a piece of driftwood, alerting them to his presence, the women ran to a pile of furs, slipped them on, and dove into the sea. But Neil was quick, and he managed to grab the sealskin of the last woman before she could don it. Despite her pleas, Neil refused to return the skin. He took the woman home and married her, and in time she bore him a son and a daughter. The children were marked by their mixed heritage. They had webs of skin between their fingers and toes, a clear sign of their Selkie blood. As the years passed, the Selkie wife grew increasingly wistful, though she remained a good and obedient spouse. The resolution came when the children, playing one day, found a piece of fur that seemed unusual and brought it to their mother, excited by their discovery. The Selkie woman knew immediately what it was. After Neil had fallen asleep that night, she took her sealskin to the water's edge. She bid her children farewell, but she told them that they would still be able to hear her singing, for they were half Selkie themselves, and the call of the sea would always be in their blood. Then she slipped into the water and was gone. The story tells us that Neil was filled with sorrow when his children told him their mother had returned to the sea. He missed her greatly for the rest of his life. But his children, bearing the mark of their Selkie heritage, found comfort in their mother's songs. On certain nights, they would hear her voice calling to them from the waves, and they would go down to the shore and swim in the sea, connecting with the part of themselves that was of the ocean, maintaining a relationship with the mother they had lost to the waves. These stories of female Selkies share common themes that speak to deep human concerns. At their most basic level, they are about coercion and consent, about the ethics of trapping another being and forcing them into a relationship. The man who steals the sealskin may love the Selkie woman, may treat her well, may even make her happy in certain ways. But the foundation of their relationship is his power over her, his possession of the thing she needs to be free. She is, in essence, his prisoner, however comfortable her prison might be. The stories also explore the theme of divided identity and the impossibility of truly belonging in both worlds. The Selkie wife lives on land, looks human, performs the role of wife and mother, but a part of her always remains in the sea. She is living a life that is, fundamentally, not truly hers. She is separated from her authentic self, from her community, from everything that made her who she is. And no matter how good the substitute life might be, it can never fully satisfy that essential part of her that belongs to the ocean. These tales can be read as metaphors for many human experiences. They speak to anyone who has ever felt trapped by circumstances, by social expectations, by the roles they are expected to play. They resonate with anyone who has experienced the pain of forced assimilation, of having to hide their true nature in order to fit into a world that does not truly accept them. They give voice to the experience of longing for a home left behind, of carrying within yourself the memory of a place or a life that you cannot return to but cannot forget. The tales of male Selkies, seduction and sorrow. While female Selkie tales dominate the tradition, stories of male Selkies offer a different perspective on these creatures and their relationships with humanity. Where female Selkies are often victims, trapped and forced into marriages, male Selkies are typically portrayed as active agents, seeking out human contact for their own purposes. Yet these stories, too, are marked by tragedy and loss, and they remind us that the barrier between human and Selkie worlds brings pain regardless of which side initiates the crossing. Male Selkies in the old tales are described as devastatingly handsome in their human form, with a charisma and magnetism that human women find irresistible. They are said to have great powers of seduction, an almost supernatural ability to charm and attract. But unlike casual seducers, male Selkies are drawn to particular kinds of women, those who are lonely, those who are unhappy in their marriages, those who spend their days waiting for fishermen husbands who are always at sea, always away, always choosing the ocean over home. In some traditions, there is a specific ritual a woman can perform if she wishes to summon a male Selkie. She must go to the shore at high tide under the light of the full moon, and there she must shed 7 tears into the sea. Each tear must be genuine, born of real sorrow or longing. If she does this correctly, a male Selkie will emerge from the waves, drawn by her grief, unable to resist the call of her sadness. He will shed his sealskin and appear before her as a handsome man, and he will offer her the comfort and companionship she craves. What follows is typically a love affair, passionate but fleeting. The male Selkie becomes the woman's lover, visiting her when he can, providing her with the emotional and physical connection she lacks in her regular life. He may father a child with her. He may promise to return again and again. But ultimately, he belongs to the sea. His true home is beneath the waves, and no matter how deep his connection to the human woman might be, he cannot remain on land forever. Eventually, he must return to the ocean, leaving the woman behind with memories and, often, a child who will bear the marks of Selkie heritage. These stories served multiple purposes in the communities where they were told. On one level, they provided a convenient explanation for unmarried women who became pregnant or for married women who bore children that looked different from their husbands. The father was a Selkie, the story would go, absolving the woman of some of the social shame that would otherwise attach to her situation. The child's unusually pale skin, or dark eyes, or webbed fingers could be attributed to Selkie blood rather than being seen as deformities or abnormalities requiring no explanation beyond the supernatural. But on a deeper level, these stories acknowledged the loneliness and isolation that many women in coastal communities experienced. With their husbands and fathers and brothers away at sea for extended periods, sometimes for months at a time, Women were left to manage homes and families largely on their own. The male selkie, then, represents a kind of wish fulfillment, an idealized lover who appears when needed, who provides comfort and companionship without the complications of human relationships, who can be loved without guilt because he is not fully of this world. The most famous of all male selkie tales is preserved in the haunting ballad known as the Great Silkie of Sule Skerry. This song, collected in the 19th century but undoubtedly much older, tells a story of love, loss, and tragic fate with a stark beauty that has ensured its survival into our own time. The ballad begins with a nursing mother, an earthly neuress as the song has it, singing to her infant child. She laments that she does not know who the child's father is or where he comes from. Then, in the darkness, a figure appears at the foot of her bed. He tells her, the child's father, though he admits he is not comely, not handsome by human standards. He reveals his nature in words that have become iconic. I am a man upon the land, and I am a silkie in the sea. And when I'm far and far from land, my dwelling is in Sule Skerry. Sule Skerry, we should understand, is a real place, a small rocky outcrop about 37 miles west of the Orkney Islands, barely more than a reef rising from the North Sea. It is a desolate, lonely place, home only to seabirds and seals, battered by winds and waves, about as far from human habitation as one can be while still remaining in sight of land. That the selkie makes his home there emphasizes his otherness, his belonging to a realm far removed from human comfort and civilization. The woman protests that it would have been better had the great selkie of Sule Skerry never come to her and fathered a child. But the selkie has not come to argue or to woo her again. He has come for a specific purpose. He places a purse of gold on her knee, payment for her services as a nurse. Then he tells her to give him his little young son, for he intends to take the boy with him and teach him to swim in the foam, to live as a selkie in the sea. The selkie then makes a prophecy, and it is here that the tragic nature of the tale becomes fully apparent. He tells the woman that she will marry a gunner, a skilled hunter, and he foretells that this gunner will one day shoot both the selkie and his son, killing them both. The ballad ends with this grim prediction, leaving the listener to understand that fate is inescapable, that the connection between the human and selkie worlds, no matter how it begins, will end in sorrow and death. There are longer versions of this ballad that include additional details. In some, the selkie offers to marry the woman, but she refuses, perhaps because she already has marriage prospects among her own kind, perhaps because she understands that a marriage between human and selkie can never truly work. In the most complete versions, the prophecy comes true. The woman does marry a gunner, and he does go out hunting seals one day. When he returns with his kill, he brings the woman a gold chain, which she recognizes as the one the selkie had given to their son. She understands then that her husband has killed both her child and her former lover, and her heart breaks with the knowledge. The power of the great Silkie of Sule Skerry lies in its inevitability. From the moment the selkie reveals himself, we sense that this encounter is doomed. The selkie and the woman live in fundamentally different worlds. The child born of their union belongs fully to neither realm, and is thus vulnerable to destruction by the human world that cannot fully accept his mixed nature. The prophecy makes explicit what we already know implicitly, that these two worlds cannot safely intersect, that attempts to bridge them will end in tragedy. Yet there is also great tenderness in the ballad, particularly in the image of the selkie teaching his son to swim in the foam. For one brief summer day, the prophecy tells us, father and son will be together in the sea, the selkie passing on his knowledge and his nature to the next generation. It is a moment of connection, of love, of the passing down of heritage. That this moment is fated to be destroyed by the gunner's shot makes it all the more precious and all the more heartbreaking. Male selkie stories, then, often carry a different emotional weight than female selkie tales. Where the female selkie is trapped and longs for freedom, The male Selkie chooses to engage with the human world, knowing full well that such engagement cannot last. He is not coerced, but rather acts according to his own desires and attractions. Yet he too cannot escape the fundamental incompatibility between his world and ours. His choices may be freer, but the outcome is often even more tragic, ending not in longing separation but in death. These stories remind us that the Selkie's dual nature is not a gift but a burden. Whether male or female, whether trapped or free, the Selkie exists in a perpetual state of being between, never fully at home in either world, always pulled by competing loyalties and desires. And those humans who involve themselves with Selkies, whether through coercion or through mutual attraction, find themselves caught up in this same impossible situation, loving someone who can never truly be theirs, trying to bridge a gap that cannot ultimately be bridged. The children of Selkies, living between two worlds. One of the most poignant aspects of Selkie mythology concerns the children born from unions between Selkies and humans. These children, inheriting the blood of both worlds, serve as living symbols of the tensions and impossibilities that run through all Selkie tales. They are marked by their mixed heritage, carrying visible signs of their Selkie ancestry, and they must navigate a life in the human world while knowing they are not entirely human themselves. The old stories consistently describe certain physical characteristics that mark Selkie children as different. The most common and most famous of these is syndactyly, the presence of webbing between the fingers and toes. In the tales, this webbing is not merely cosmetic, but is said to have almost supernatural properties. According to the folklore, if the webbing is cut away, as anxious parents or midwives often attempted to do, trying to normalize the child's appearance, it would grow back. In some versions, when cut, it would be replaced by a rough, rigid growth rather than normal skin, as though the Selkie nature within the child was asserting itself, refusing to be removed or denied. Whether this regrowth actually occurred or represents storytelling embellishment, the tales consistently emphasize the persistence of Selkie markers. Other physical markers mentioned in various tales include unusually pale skin, so fair it almost seems to glow, or conversely, skin with a greenish cast, as though still bearing the color of the sea. Eyes might be described as being darker than normal, pools of liquid black like a seal's eyes, or sometimes as being an unusually pale or bright blue or green, the color of shallow water over sand. Hair was typically said to be very dark, black as a seal's coat, with a particular texture, straight or gently waving like kelp moving in the current. Beyond these specific physical traits, Selkie children were said to possess certain behavioral characteristics that marked them as different. They were drawn to the water in ways that seemed almost compulsive. From their earliest years, they would be found playing at the shore whenever possible, showing no fear of the waves that terrified other children. They were natural swimmers, moving through water with an ease and grace that seemed instinctive rather than learned. According to the tales, Selkie children could not drown. The sea itself would protect those who carried Selkie blood, though this belief likely reflects the children's genuine comfort and skill in the water rather than any supernatural immunity. The most famous historical example of a family claiming Selkie descent is the MacCodrum clan of the Outer Hebrides. Known as MacCodrums of the Seals, this family maintained for generations that they were descended from a union between a fisherman named Neil MacCodrum and a Selkie woman. As evidence of this heritage, members of the family were often born with syndactyly, the webbing between fingers and toes that marked them as carrying Selkie blood. The family took pride in this heritage, seeing it not as a deformity to be hidden, but as proof of their connection to something extraordinary and magical. Other families also claimed Selkie ancestry. The Conneely clan of Connemara in Western Ireland was said to be descended from seals, and members of this family observed specific taboos against killing seals, believing that to do so would bring terrible misfortune upon them. The name Conneely itself became so associated with seals that it was sometimes used as a term for the animals, and many members of the family eventually changed their surname to Connolly to distance themselves from this association. Before the advent of modern medicine, when genetic conditions were poorly understood and often untreatable, families sought explanations for children born with unusual characteristics. In communities steeped in folklore and belief in the otherworld, supernatural explanations provided both a framework for understanding and, in some cases, a way to transform potential stigma into something special. A child with webbed fingers was not merely deformed. They carried the blood of the magical Selkie folk. A child with pale skin or unusual behavior was not strange or problematic. They were marked by their connection to the seal people of the sea. But the lives of Selkie children, as portrayed in the stories, were not easy. They existed in a liminal space, belonging fully to neither the human world nor the seal world. In the tales where a Selkie mother returns to the sea, her children are often left behind, too human to follow her into the ocean, yet marked by their Selkie heritage in ways that might make them objects of suspicion or fear among their fully human neighbors. They grow up with the absence of their mother as a constant ache, listening for her voice in the songs of the seals, hoping to catch glimpses of her in the waters near shore. Yet many stories also emphasize that Selkie children maintain a connection to their seal parent even after separation. They can hear their mother's or father's voice calling to them from the sea in ways that fully human people cannot. On certain nights, particularly those associated with magical times like Midsummer or Samhain, they might go down to the shore and find their Selkie parent waiting for them. In these precious meetings, they can swim together, and the children can experience, however briefly, what it feels like to belong fully to the ocean realm of their heritage. Some stories tell of Selkie children who eventually choose to return to the sea permanently, reclaiming their Selkie nature and leaving the human world behind. Others live out their lives on land, but maintain always a special relationship with the ocean, working as fishermen or sailors, spending as much time as possible near the water, passing down to their own children the stories of their Selkie ancestry and the marks of that heritage in the webbing of their fingers or the darkness of their eyes. The figure of the Selkie child speaks to anyone who has ever felt caught between two worlds, two cultures, two identities. They represent the experience of mixed heritage, of carrying within oneself the legacy of different peoples, different ways of being, and the challenge of forging an identity that honors both parts of oneself while belonging fully to neither. They embody the complexity of inheritance, both the gifts and the burdens that come from our ancestors, the marks we carry whether we wish to or not. In modern interpretations, the Selkie child has become a particularly powerful symbol for exploring themes of belonging and alienation, of the search for identity and the pain of feeling other. They represent those who exist on the margins, who carry visible or invisible markers of difference, who must navigate a world that does not fully accept them while trying to honor all parts of who they are. The Selkie child's yearning for the sea becomes a metaphor for the longing many people feel for a sense of home, for full acceptance, for a place where all of who they are is welcomed and celebrated. The deeper symbolism, what Selkies represent. To understand the enduring power of Selkie mythology, we must look beyond the surface narrative of seal people and stolen skins to the deeper meanings and symbols that these stories carry. For the Selkie, in all its various forms and tales, represents far more than simply a magical creature from old folklore. It embodies fundamental human experiences and concerns, giving shape to feelings and situations that are otherwise difficult to articulate. At the most obvious level, the Selkie represents the tension between freedom and captivity, between autonomy and coercion. The stolen sealskin is not merely a magical object, but a symbol of agency itself, of the ability to choose one's own path and determine one's own life. When a Selkie's skin is taken, what is really being stolen is their freedom, their power to choose whether to stay or to go, their control over their own existence. The human who holds the skin holds power over the Selkie's very self, and no matter how kindly they might wield that power, it remains a form of coercion. This theme resonates deeply with anyone who has experienced situations where their choices have been constrained by others. It speaks to those who have found themselves in relationships where the power dynamic is unequal, where one partner holds something essential over the other. It reflects the experience of being trapped by circumstances, whether economic, social, or personal, that limit one's ability to make free choices. The Selkies' longing for the sea becomes a potent metaphor for any person's longing to break free from whatever constrains them and return to a state where they can be fully themselves. The sealskin itself is rich with symbolic meaning. It represents identity, the essential nature of who and what the Selkie truly is. Without it, the Selkie can appear human and perform human roles, but they are fundamentally incomplete, separated from their true self. This speaks to experiences of having to hide one's authentic nature, of presenting a false or incomplete version of oneself to the world because one's true self is not accepted or safe to reveal. For marginalized people throughout history and into the present day, the experience of the Selkie wife who must pretend to be content with a human life while secretly yearning for the freedom to be who she truly is resonates profoundly. The LGBT community, people of color in predominantly white spaces, immigrants forced to assimilate and hide their cultural heritage, disabled people having to mask their struggles to appear normal. All of these experiences find echo in the Selkie's plight. The moment when the Selkie recovers their skin and returns to the sea becomes a powerful metaphor for reclaiming one's authentic identity, for throwing off the disguises and pretenses that survival in an unwelcoming world demands, for finally being able to be fully, completely oneself. The Selkie also embodies the concept of liminality, of existing in the threshold space between categories. They are neither fully seal nor fully human, neither completely of the land nor completely of the sea. They move between states, transforming from one to the other, but they never entirely belong to either. This liminal quality makes the Selkie a perfect symbol for any kind of in-between existence, any experience of being caught between worlds or identities. For people of mixed heritage, the Selkie's dual nature speaks directly to their experience of moving between different cultural worlds, of being seen as not quite one thing or another, of having to navigate different expectations and identities depending on context. The Selkie child with webbed fingers, marked by their mixed parentage, unable to fully pass in either world, captures something of what it feels like to carry visible or invisible markers of being between categories. The ocean itself in Selkie tales operates as a powerful symbol. It represents the wild, the free, the natural, the authentic. It is the realm where the Selkie can be fully themselves, where they do not have to pretend or perform or constrain their nature. The ocean is dangerous and difficult for humans, cold and alien, but for the Selkie it is home, the place where they truly belong. This contrast between the ocean as liberating for the Selkie and deadly for humans underscores the fundamental incompatibility between the two worlds. But the ocean also represents mystery, the unconscious, the depths of emotion and experience that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. When a Selkie returns to the sea, they are not just going back to a physical place but to a different mode of being, to depths that human understanding cannot fathom. The ocean becomes a symbol of the parts of ourselves that remain hidden, mysterious even to ourselves, the vast interior landscape that cannot be fully known or controlled. The Selkie stories are also deeply concerned with transformation, not just the physical transformation from seal to human, but the emotional and spiritual transformations that relationships demand. The human who falls in love with a Selkie is changed by that love, must face the reality that loving someone means accepting that they have their own nature, their own needs, their own path that might diverge from yours. The Selkie who lives for years in human form, raising children and making a home, is also transformed, developing attachments and affections that complicate their identity and their choices. These transformations speak to how relationships change us, how we adapt and adjust ourselves to accommodate those we love, how we sometimes lose pieces of ourselves in that process. The Selkie who returns to the sea is not the same being who first came ashore. They carry with them the memory of their human life, of the children they bore, of the love they experienced, however compromised by coercion. The human left behind is also transformed, marked forever by the experience of loving someone who could never truly be tamed or domesticated, whose essential nature called them to a place where the human could not follow. From a feminist perspective, Selkie stories have been read as reflections on women's experiences in patriarchal societies, where marriage has historically been less about mutual choice and more about a transfer of property and power from father to husband. The stolen sealskin becomes a symbol of women's agency being taken from them, of being trapped in domestic roles and marriages not of their choosing, of having to perform happiness and contentment while secretly longing for the freedom they have lost. The moment of reclaiming the sealskin and returning to the sea is thus a powerful image of women reclaiming their autonomy, their power, their authentic selves from systems and relationships that have constrained them. At the same time, Selkie stories acknowledge the complex emotional reality of such situations. The Selkie wife is not always miserable. She may genuinely love her children, may have real affection for her husband, may find moments of joy in her human life. Her choice to return to the sea when she recovers her skin is not always easy or uncomplicated. She is torn between the life she has built and the nature she cannot deny. This complexity makes the stories more powerful because they acknowledge that even in situations of coercion and constraint, genuine bonds can form, making the choice between freedom and connection all the more difficult. The psychological depth of Selkie mythology also speaks to the human experience of feeling trapped by our own nature, by aspects of ourselves that we cannot change no matter how much we might wish to. The Selkie cannot choose to be fully human, cannot decide to belong entirely to the land. Their nature calls them back to the sea inevitably. This reflects how we all have fundamental aspects of our personalities, our needs, our desires that persist regardless of our circumstances, that resurface no matter how deeply we try to bury them. The call of the sea that the Selkie cannot resist becomes a metaphor for any drive or need that is so fundamental to who we are that denying it means denying ourselves. Coastal communities and the sacred relationship with the sea. To truly understand Selkie mythology, we must understand the communities that created and maintained these stories. The tales did not emerge from a vacuum, but from the lived experience of people whose entire existence was intimately bound to the ocean, who understood the sea not as a recreational space or a distant abstraction, but as the source of life and the ever-present threat of death. The coastal communities of Ireland, Scotland, Orkney, Shetland, the Hebrides, these were places where the sea was everything. It provided food, fish and shellfish that formed the basis of the diet, seaweed that could be harvested for food and fertilizer, seals that could be hunted for their meat, oil, and skins. The sea provided transportation, the only practical way to travel between islands or along rugged coastlines where roads were poor or non-existent. The sea determined the rhythm of life. When you could fish, when you could travel, when you had to stay safe on shore because the storms were too dangerous. But the sea also took. It took men who went out fishing and never returned, claimed by sudden storms or accidents or simply by the cold, which could kill in minutes. It took children who ventured too close to the shore when the waves were high. It took whole communities sometimes, when the harvest failed and there was no choice but to risk going out in dangerous conditions to try to bring in enough food to survive. The sea was both mother and destroyer, provider and taker, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. In such communities, it is unsurprising that the sea would be understood as having a spiritual dimension, as being not just water and salt and cold but a realm of power and mystery. The creatures of the sea were regarded with a mixture of wonder and reverence. Seals in particular occupied a special place in this worldview. They were mammals like humans, warm-blooded creatures that had to surface to breathe, that nursed their young, that seemed to have personalities and social structures. They had eyes that seemed disturbingly human, that appeared to convey emotion and intelligence. They were curious creatures that would watch humans with apparent interest, that would sometimes approach boats or swimmers with what looked like deliberate intent. The relationship between coastal communities and seals was complex and sometimes contradictory. On one hand, seals were competitors, eating fish that humans needed to catch, sometimes damaging nets or fishing equipment. In times of hardship, seals might be hunted for their meat and especially for their blubber, which provided valuable oil for lamps and other purposes. But killing a seal was never done lightly. Superstitions held that killing a seal could bring terrible misfortune. Storms that would destroy boats, bad catches of fish, illness in the family, even death. These taboos against harming seals were particularly strong in families that claimed Selkie ancestry, like the MacCodrums or the Keneallys. For these families, killing a seal was tantamount to killing a relative, and the consequences would be dire. But even in families without such claims, there was a general sense that seals should be treated with respect, that they were not ordinary animals but beings that stood in some special relationship to humans. This reverence had practical roots. Communities that depended entirely on the sea for survival understood that they were ultimately at the mercy of forces far more powerful than themselves. The ocean could not be controlled or dominated, only respected and, hopefully, appeased. In this context, believing that seals might be shape-shifting beings, that they might be fallen angels or the souls of drowned sailors, that they stood in some liminal space between human and animal, made perfect sense. It was a way of acknowledging the mystery and power of the sea, of recognizing that the boundary between the human world and the natural world was not as fixed and absolute as we might like to think. The Selkie stories also served important social functions within these communities. They provided explanations for phenomena that were otherwise difficult to understand or accept. Children born with unusual physical characteristics could be understood as carrying Selkie blood rather than being seen as cursed or wrong. Women who became pregnant outside of marriage could claim a Selkie lover, transforming potential shame into something mysterious and almost romantic. Sailors who never returned from the sea might be imagined to have been taken not by death but by Selkie lovers, transformed into seal form themselves and living happily beneath the waves. These explanatory functions should not be dismissed as merely convenient fictions. They represent a worldview in which the boundaries between categories, human and animal, natural and supernatural, living and dead, were understood to be permeable and negotiable. It was a worldview that made room for mystery, for experiences that could not be neatly explained by rational means, for the persistence of wonder in the face of the unknown. The oral tradition through which Selkie stories were passed down for generations was itself an expression of community identity and continuity. These were not stories read from books but tales told around fires, songs sung while working, beliefs woven into the very fabric of daily life. Each generation received the stories from the one before and passed them on to the next, sometimes with variations, sometimes with embellishments, but always maintaining the essential core, that seals were more than they seemed, that the ocean held mysteries beyond human understanding, that our world and the other world were separated by boundaries that could sometimes, in special circumstances, be crossed. In this sense, Selkie mythology represents a way of being in relationship with the natural world that is fundamentally different from the dominant modern perspective. Rather than seeing nature as something separate from humanity, something to be studied objectively and exploited practically, these communities understood themselves as existing within a web of relationships that included not just other humans but animals, the sea itself, the spirits and beings that inhabited the other world. Selkies were one strand in this web, beings that embodied the interconnection between humans and the ocean, that reminded people of their dependence on and vulnerability to forces far greater than themselves. This perspective has particular resonance in our current era of environmental crisis. As we face the reality of how human activity has damaged ocean ecosystems, depleted fish stocks, polluted waters, and disrupted the lives of marine mammals including seals, Selkie stories remind us of an older understanding of our relationship with the sea. They call us to recognize that we are not separate from or superior to the natural world but part of it, bound to it by ties that cannot be broken without ultimately destroying ourselves. The Selkie who must return to the sea, who cannot survive permanently on land no matter how comfortable that life might be, reminds us that all creatures have needs that must be met, natures that must be honored. The human who tries to keep the Selkie captive by hiding their skin might seem at first to succeed, but ultimately the Selkie's true nature reasserts itself. This can be read as a warning about our attempts to bend nature entirely to our will, to ignore the limits and requirements of the natural systems we depend on. Like the Selkie, nature will ultimately reclaim its own, whether we respect it or not. Cultural legacy. Selkies in Irish and Scottish identity. Selkie mythology is not merely a collection of old stories but an integral part of Irish and Scottish cultural identity, particularly in coastal regions where these tales originated and have been most carefully preserved. Understanding the role of Selkies in these cultures requires understanding how folklore functions not just as entertainment, but as a carrier of values, beliefs, and collective memory. In the Gaelic-speaking communities of Western Ireland and the Scottish Islands, Selkie stories were part of a much larger body of folklore that shaped how people understood their world and their place in it. These were communities with deep roots in Celtic tradition, where despite centuries of English influence and attempts at cultural suppression, the old language and the old ways persisted. In these contexts, knowing the stories of the Selkies, of the fairies, of the ancient heroes and the Tuatha De Danann, was part of what it meant to be Irish or Scottish, part of the heritage that connected you to your ancestors and your land. The preservation of these stories in the face of cultural pressure makes them particularly significant. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, as the English language increasingly displaced Gaelic, as traditional ways of life were disrupted by economic changes and emigration, as the Church worked to suppress what it saw as pagan superstition, the fact that people continued to tell Selkie stories, to maintain beliefs about the Seal people, to pass these tales down to their children, represented an act of cultural resistance and preservation. The work of folklorists in the 19th and early 20th centuries to collect and record these stories was therefore not just academic but cultural preservation work. When Captain F.W.L. Thomas recorded the Great Silkie of Sule Skerry from an old woman in Shetland, when Francis James Child included it in his ballad collection, when researchers throughout Scotland and Ireland sought out storytellers and recorded their tales, they were ensuring that knowledge which had previously existed only in memory and oral tradition would survive in a form that could reach future generations, even if the unbroken chain of oral transmission were to break. Today, Selkie stories remain an important part of how Irish and Scottish people, particularly those from coastal regions, understand and express their cultural identity. They appear in contemporary literature by Irish and Scottish authors who draw on their heritage for inspiration. They feature in festivals and cultural celebrations, in storytelling events, in educational materials used to teach children about their culture. They have become emblematic of Celtic identity more broadly, recognized symbols that immediately evoke the culture and landscape of the Celtic fringe. But Selkie mythology also invites us to think about how we compare and relate our stories to those of other cultures. The motif of the seal wife, the supernatural woman whose skin or cloak is stolen to force her into marriage, appears far beyond the Celtic world. It is part of the broader swan maiden tale type, which appears across Europe and Asia. In Japan, There are stories of the Tenning, celestial maidens whose feathered robes allow them to fly. When a man steals such a robe, the maiden must remain on earth as his wife. In Germanic tradition, there are tales of swan maidens, women who can transform into swans and back. In Russian folklore, we find similar stories of bird maidens. The widespread nature of this tale type suggests that it taps into universal human concerns. The tension between freedom and domesticity, the ethics of coercion in relationships, the impossibility of truly possessing another person, the clash between wildness and civilization. Different cultures have given these concerns different specific forms. Seals in Celtic lands, swans in Germanic areas, celestial beings in Japan. But the underlying themes remain remarkably consistent. At the same time, the specific Celtic version of this tale type has unique characteristics that reflect the particular cultural and environmental context from which it emerged. The emphasis on the sea and on seals rather than birds or other creatures reflects the maritime nature of the communities that created these stories. The particular emotional tenor of Selkie tales, their profound melancholy and their focus on impossible longing, reflects something about Celtic sensibility, about the way these cultures have historically processed themes of loss, exile, and yearning for a home left behind. The historical experience of the Celtic peoples, particularly the Irish and Scottish, has been marked by displacement and diaspora. Centuries of English colonization, economic hardship, famine, and political oppression drove millions to emigrate, leaving behind their ancestral lands for uncertain futures in distant countries. The Selkie who is trapped on land, far from her true home, yearning always for the sea from which she has been separated, could hardly be a more perfect metaphor for this experience. The moment when she reclaims her skin and returns to the ocean resonates with the dreams of those in diaspora, the hope of one day returning home, of reclaiming the identity and the place that were taken away. This connection between Selkie mythology and the broader Irish and Scottish experience of exile and longing helps explain why these stories have remained so powerful even among people who live far from the ocean, who have never seen a seal, who exist in contexts completely removed from the physical environment that gave birth to the tales. The specifics may be about seals and sealskins, but the emotions and experiences the stories encode are universal to the human condition and particularly resonant for cultures that have experienced displacement and cultural suppression. Religious traditions also intersected with Selkie beliefs in interesting ways. Christianity, which arrived in Ireland and Scotland in the early medieval period, never entirely displaced older Celtic beliefs but rather mixed with them, creating a unique synthesis of Christian faith and pre-Christian tradition. In this mixed context, Selkies were sometimes explained as fallen angels, beings who had been cast out of heaven for their sins but had fallen into the sea rather than into hell, condemned to live out their existence in the form of seals, but occasionally permitted to take human form. This explanation allowed Selkie beliefs to be reconciled with Christian theology while maintaining their essential nature. It also added a layer of sympathy to the Selkie. They were not demons or evil spirits but tragic beings suffering the consequences of ancient sins, worthy of pity rather than fear. Some stories even suggested that Selkies might be souls in purgatory, working off their sins through their existence in seal form, or that they were the souls of people who had drowned at sea, given a second form of existence in the ocean that had claimed them. These interpretations represent attempts to understand the Selkie through a Christian lens, though it's worth noting they existed alongside older, non-Christian understandings. These Christian reinterpretations of Selkie mythology did not replace the older, pagan-inflected versions, but existed alongside them, offering different frameworks through which to understand these mysterious beings. This layering of interpretations, this willingness to hold multiple explanations simultaneously without requiring them to be reconciled into a single coherent system, is characteristic of Celtic approaches to mythology and belief more generally. Modern interpretations. Selkies in contemporary culture. The Selkie has proven to be a remarkably adaptable figure, capable of taking on new meanings and resonating with new audiences even as we move further from the traditional cultural contexts that first created these stories. In modern literature, film, art, and music, Selkies continue to appear, reinterpreted through contemporary lenses but retaining their essential character and the themes that have made them enduring. In literature, Selkies have inspired countless works, from poetry to novels to short stories. Irish and Scottish authors in particular have drawn on Selkie mythology to explore themes of identity, belonging, and the relationship between humans and nature. Poets have found in the Selkie a perfect symbol for articulating feelings of longing and loss, for capturing the sense of being caught between worlds. The Selkies' transformation, their dual nature, their impossible situation, lends itself naturally to poetic treatment, offering rich imagery and metaphor. Contemporary novelists have used Selkie mythology to explore more complex psychological and social themes. Authors like Juliet Marillier and Sue Monk Kidd have woven Selkie elements into works that examine women's experiences, particularly themes of autonomy, identity, and the pressure to conform to social expectations. In these retellings, the stolen sealskin becomes an even more explicit metaphor for women's agency being taken from them, and the moment of reclaiming it represents feminist awakening and empowerment. Environmental writers have also found the Selkie to be a powerful symbol for exploring human relationships with the ocean and marine life. As we become more aware of how human activity threatens ocean ecosystems, the Selkie serves as a reminder of a time when people understood themselves to be in relationship with the sea and its inhabitants rather than simply exploiting them. The Selkies' need to return to the ocean, their inability to survive permanently on land, can be read as a warning about the consequences of treating the natural world as something to be conquered and controlled rather than respected and protected. In visual arts, Selkies have inspired paintings, sculptures, and illustrations that capture their beauty and their tragedy. Artists are drawn to the liminal quality of the Selkie, the moment of transformation between seal and human, the image of a creature poised between two worlds. The aesthetic of Selkie art often emphasizes the fluidity of boundaries, using water and light and shadow to create images that seem to shift and change as you look at them, never quite settling into a single definitive form. Film and television have also embraced Selkie mythology, though with varying degrees of faithfulness to the traditional stories. Some of the most notable cinematic treatments include The Secret of Roan Inish, a 1994 film that weaves together Selkie folklore with the story of a young girl discovering her family's magical heritage. The film treats the Selkie mythology with respect and seriousness, presenting it not as mere fantasy, but as something that carries deep meaning about identity, family, and connection to place. Song of the Sea, a 2014 Irish animated film, uses Selkie mythology as the framework for a story about a young girl coming to terms with her identity as a Selkie and learning to use her voice, both literally and metaphorically. The film is visually stunning, drawing on Celtic art traditions to create a distinctive aesthetic that honors the cultural origins of the story while making it accessible to contemporary audiences. It explores themes of grief, family, and the importance of embracing one's true nature that resonate far beyond the specific context of Selkie mythology. More recently, Selkie themes have appeared in television series, young adult novels, and even in graphic novel form, each adaptation finding new ways to make these ancient stories relevant to contemporary concerns. Some retellings emphasize the romantic elements, creating love stories between humans and Selkies that explore themes of sacrifice and choosing between different kinds of love. Others focus on the identity aspects, using the Selkies' dual nature to explore questions of belonging and authenticity that resonate particularly with younger audiences navigating their own questions of identity and place in the world. In music, The Selkie continues to inspire compositions ranging from traditional folk ballads to contemporary classical works to popular music. The great Silkie of Sule Skerry has been recorded by countless artists, each bringing their own interpretation to the haunting melody and tragic story. Interestingly, the tune that most people know today was actually composed in the 1950s by American folklorist Jim Waters, who created it as a way to bring the old ballad to life for contemporary audiences. Though not traditional, it has become so strongly associated with the ballad that many assume it is ancient. The song gained widespread popularity when folk legend Joan Baez recorded it in the 1960s, helping to introduce this piece of Celtic mythology to audiences far beyond its original shores. Contemporary composers have created new works inspired by Selkie mythology, using the stories as the basis for everything from chamber music to orchestral suites to experimental electronic compositions. These musical interpretations often emphasize the otherworldly quality of the Selkie, using unconventional harmonies, modal scales that evoke ancient Celtic music, and sometimes incorporating actual recordings of seals vocalizing to create an audio landscape that bridges the human and animal worlds. The enduring appeal of Selkies in modern culture speaks to the timelessness of the themes these stories explore. In an era when many people feel disconnected from nature, the Selkie reminds us of the deep bonds that tie us to the natural world and the costs of breaking those bonds. In an age of increasing awareness about issues of consent and power in relationships, the traditional Selkie tale offers a framework for thinking about coercion and the ethics of limiting another person's freedom, even in the name of love. In a time when questions of identity, particularly for people of mixed heritage or those who don't fit neatly into prescribed categories, are increasingly visible, the Selkie's experience of existing between worlds resonates powerfully. The modern environmental movement has found particular value in Selkie mythology as a way of expressing concerns about humanity's relationship with the ocean. As we face the reality of climate change affecting marine ecosystems, of plastic pollution filling the seas, of overfishing depleting fish stocks, of oil spills and other disasters harming marine mammals including seals, the Selkie serves as a powerful symbol of what we risk losing if we continue to treat the ocean as an infinite resource to be exploited rather than a living system that must be respected and protected. In this interpretation, the Selkie's captivity on land, separated from the sea that is their true home, represents the damage we do when we disrupt natural systems and force nature to conform to human desires without regard for the consequences. The Selkie's inevitable return to the sea, regardless of what they must leave behind, reminds us that nature ultimately operates according to its own laws and imperatives, not ours, and that our attempts to control and dominate will ultimately fail. At the same time, modern retellings often seek to complicate the traditional narrative, finding ways to imagine scenarios where the human and Selkie worlds might coexist more harmoniously. Some contemporary versions imagine Selkies who choose to spend time in the human world not out of coercion, but out of genuine desire, who find ways to move between their two forms and two worlds more freely. These retellings acknowledge the problematic elements of the traditional tales while maintaining the core appeal of the Selkie as a figure of transformation and possibility. The enduring call of the sea, conclusion and reflection. As we reach the end of our journey through Selkie mythology, let us pause at the shore one final time and reflect on what these ancient stories continue to offer us today. The Selkie, that being of profound transformation and dual nature, that creature of the liminal spaces between land and sea, human and animal, freedom and captivity, has traveled with us through centuries of telling and retelling, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential character. At its heart, the Selkie myth is about belonging and alienation, about the pain of being separated from your true home and the compromises we make when we cannot be fully ourselves. It is about the impossibility of possession, the reality that we cannot truly own another being, no matter how much we might love them or desire them. It reminds us that every creature, every person, has a nature that cannot be entirely suppressed or denied, that will reassert itself however long it might be hidden or constrained. These themes remain as relevant today as they were in the ancient fishing communities of Scotland and Ireland, where these stories took root and flourished. Perhaps they are even more relevant now, in an age where so many people feel disconnected from their roots, unsure of where they truly belong, caught between different aspects of their identity, pressured to conform to expectations that don't match their authentic selves. The Selkie speaks to anyone who has ever felt like they were wearing a mask, playing a role, living a life that doesn't quite fit. The Selkie also reminds us of our relationship with the natural world, particularly with the ocean. In an era of environmental crisis, when we have become perhaps too disconnected from nature, when we treat the oceans as dumping grounds and fishing zones rather than living systems worthy of respect, the Selkie calls us back to an older understanding. The Seal people of folklore knew that the ocean was not just a resource but a realm of mystery and power, home to beings that demanded our respect and care. They understood that humans and the sea existed in relationship, that what happened to one affected the other, that boundaries between our world and the natural world were permeable and must be honored. The stories tell us something important about transformation and change. The Selkie's ability to move between forms, to shed one skin and take on another, speaks to the human capacity for growth and adaptation. But it also reminds us that some transformations are reversible, that we can return to earlier forms and identities when we have the means to do so, that change need not be permanent or total. The sealskin, hidden but not destroyed, represents the possibility of return, of reclamation, of going back to who we were before circumstances forced us to become something else. For those who have experienced displacement, whether through migration or cultural oppression or personal circumstance, the Selkie's story of longing for home resonates deeply. The Selkie on land, gazing at the ocean, singing songs in a language their human family cannot understand, yearning for a return that seems impossible, captures something essential about the immigrant experience, about what it means to live in one place while your heart remains in another, to create a new life while never forgetting the old one. For those who have felt trapped in relationships or situations not of their choosing, the moment when the Selkie reclaims their skin and returns to the sea offers a powerful image of liberation. It reminds us that it is never too late to reclaim our agency, to return to who we truly are, to choose freedom even when that choice comes at great cost. The Selkie leaves behind family, children, a life that had both painful and joyful elements, but they cannot deny the call of their true nature. This is not presented as an easy or uncomplicated choice, but as a necessary one, a choice that speaks to the importance of honoring who we are at our core. The children of Selkies, marked by their mixed heritage, carrying visible or invisible signs of their dual nature, remind us about what it means to be between worlds. They represent anyone whose identity is complex, who carries multiple heritages or experiences, who doesn't fit neatly into a single category. Their ability to hear their Selkie parents' voice calling from the waves, to maintain connection across the boundary between worlds, offers hope that even in separation, bonds can persist, that belonging to two worlds is possible even if difficult. As we consider the legacy of Selkie mythology and its continued relevance, we might ask ourselves what lessons these old stories still have to teach us. They remind us to respect the autonomy of others, to understand that love cannot justify taking away someone's freedom, that genuine connection requires allowing the other to be fully themselves. They caution us against trying to possess or control what we love, against believing that we can make something or someone belong to us simply because we desire it. They teach us about the cost of transformation and the necessity of honoring our authentic nature. They show us that superficial changes that are merely external, cannot suppress the deeper truth of who we are. The Selkie can appear human, can play the role of wife and mother, can seem content with a land-based life, but their seal nature persists, calling to them from the sea, until finally it can no longer be denied. They invite us to think about boundaries and their permeability, about the spaces between categories, about the possibility of moving between different states and identities. The selkie is not trapped as either seal or human but can be both, moving between these forms as conditions allow. This fluidity, this refusal to be contained in a single category, offers a model for thinking about identity in more flexible and less rigid ways. Most fundamentally, perhaps, Selkie stories remind us of the power of myth itself, of the enduring ability of these old tales to speak to new generations, to adapt to new contexts, to carry meanings that their original tellers might not have consciously intended, but which are nonetheless present in the structure and symbolism of the stories. The selkie has survived for centuries not because the details of seal transformation are particularly relevant to modern life, but because the deeper themes and patterns the stories encode continue to resonate with fundamental human experiences and concerns. So let us honor these stories and the cultures that created and preserved them. Let us remember the fishing communities of Ireland and Scotland, the storytellers who kept these tales alive through generations of telling, the folklorists who recorded them before the last speakers of the old language passed away. Let us recognize in the selkie not just a quaint figure from folklore, but a powerful symbol that continues to offer insights into the human condition. And perhaps, the next time you find yourself at the ocean's edge, watching the waves roll in, you might look out at the seals basking on rocks or bobbing in the surf, and you might wonder. You might notice the almost human quality of their eyes, the intelligence that seems to shine there. You might hear in their calls something that sounds almost like song. And you might remember the old stories, the tales of the seal people, and feel for a moment the mystery and magic that people once understood as permeating the natural world. For in the end, that is what Selkie mythology offers us, a way of seeing the world as more than merely material, more than simply a collection of resources to be exploited. It invites us into a worldview where transformation is possible, where boundaries are negotiable, where the ordinary seals in the water might be something more, where magic and mystery still exist at the edges of our understanding. It reminds us that we live in a world richer and stranger than we often acknowledge, a world where stories older than memory still have something vital to teach us about who we are and how we should live. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the mists and myths of the Selkie tradition. May these stories stay with you, whispering their truths as you go about your days, reminding you of the deep connections that bind us to each other, to our ancestors, to the natural world, and to the mysterious depths of our own natures. May you find your own sealskin, whatever form it takes, and may you have the courage to reclaim it when the time comes. And may the call of the sea, in whatever form it speaks to you, guide you home to yourself. Until we meet again in this cozy haven of stories, I bid you peace, wonder, and the blessing of the Selkies. May you always know where you belong, and may you have the freedom to return there. Before I leave you to your dreams tonight, remember to like this video if the stories touched your heart, and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss another journey into the myths and legends of the Celtic world. Sleep well, dear travelers, and may your dreams be filled with the sound of waves and the songs of the seal people.